This inflation thing's a big deal. So in the first 90 days, the strokes that you make to change the economy when you're elected, that's pretty dramatic.
I believe I'll be able to get energy down to 50% of what it is right now within a period of less than a year.
I know small businesses are where jobs come from. When you guys in government can take your hands off of small business, we're able to employ people and change things. So how can you help small businesses?
You have to love what you do. If you don't love what you do, it's not going to work. It's the largest tax cuts in the history of our country. That's why we became so successful.
You think we can do that again?
Yeah, I think we can go lower. If I don't turn my head at the exact 90-degree angle, if I was a little off, I'm not doing this very nice interview with you.
I hear you're going back to Butler and finish the speech.
I am. I'm going to say...
Hey guys, Dave Ramsey here with The Ramsey Show. If you don't know what The Ramsey Show is, it's a show about life, about money, about relationships. It's not a show about politics. We specifically over the years have tried to remind you over and over again that what happens in your house is more important for your success than what happens in the White House. We also realize that this election is a really important time right now. The people are really looking at what's happening. There's a real divisiveness in the air, a lot of anger in the air. So our team reached out to Vice President Harris's team about the opportunity to sit down with her for a long-form interview, and reached out to President Trump's team about the opportunity to sit down for a long-form interview with him and to talk about ideas, talk about what's going to happen, not what has happened, and not about personalities and not about name calling, because both sides are pretty good at all of that stuff. And the fact that I sit down with either one of these candidates is going to piss some of you off, and frankly, I'm perfectly fine with that. It's something I wanted to do, and I felt like it was something we needed to talk about. So I find myself sitting here in Trump Tower, getting ready to interview President Trump for a few minutes. I think you're going to find this really interesting.
Yeah, pretty strong start so far. Obviously, for folks who saw the previous video, which was kind of a teaser to this, they already started to show portions of that interview. So this is going to be what I understand to be the full interview that Dave had with Trump. So definitely looking forward to see what gets covered here. Obviously, they highlighted a number of financial issues already as part of their questions, so we'll see where they take it.
So, President Trump, thanks for taking time to sit down with us.
Thank you.
Honored to be
much.
with you. Good to hang out with you. As you know, we do a show called The Ramsey Show and talk to regular folks every day, calling in most of the time with financial trouble, sometimes with financial victories, stuff we've taught them to do, the basic grandma's common sense stuff.
Right.
And that audience that's going to be watching this they're not concerned with a lot of things, but they are concerned with $8 eggs, $5 gas, 7% interest rates, and a house they can't afford with wages not going up as fast as house prices. Right. This inflation thing's a big deal. So in the first 90 days, the strokes that you make to change the economy when you're elected are a big deal. What's the first things you're going to do on that?
Well, in terms of inflation, you're right. And it's almost inflation over the economy, if you want to really know, because people are getting wiped out like never before. I think it's the highest inflation we've ever had. They say it's the highest in 48 years. I think it's the highest ever. There's never been any mess like this, and it's because of what they did with energy. Also, then they topped it with spending with money, that trillions and trillions of dollars that they didn't need, that's being just wasted. But the first thing you have to do is get the energy down. If you get the energy down, other things are going to follow. You want to get the interest rates down too. And interestingly, even interest rates are going to follow energy, because it's going to take that burden off the shoulders of the economy and off the shoulders of inflation itself. And we are going to drill at a level that you haven't seen since, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago. But even more so, we would have been so dominant by this point. If you remember, when you go back.
So just going to take a moment there. Seems like he might be getting into some other topics there. So he starts off with this energy segment. It's interesting to hear that he highlighted basically if you lower energy costs, it will lower interest rates. It's an interesting perspective that he has there. Maybe he'll explain his rationale. I think he did say to some extent basically other things get cheaper at that point. But the president doesn't regulate interest rates. That's the Fed's job. And this is tied with they want some inflation to exist. They usually target around the 2%, but they also want to offset it with basically jobs and employment, which is where we just saw the rate cut recently. Is actually because unemployment started to tick up a bit. I think it had just passed maybe the 4.3% marker. And so basically they started to shift down on the interest rates to basically ensure that jobs wouldn't go away at this time. So energy kind of tying into this piece. Maybe he's highlighting some form of butterfly effect that could be happening here. But again, I'm not sure if I'm following that point so far, as if you made energy cheaper, then it gets cheaper, presumably for goods, maybe higher profit margins here. Maybe employment could go up, presumably in this case. But then the Fed would have likely kept interest rates high because we still haven't gotten below the 2% rate. So likely if there was more jobs or more margin, theoretically there would actually be higher interest rates at this point in time. So that way they could continue to cool inflation a bit there. So interested to see where he takes it.
Back to the beginning of this really failed administration that we're in right now, what they did was they turned off the energy. They turned off everything that I had
So you
built.
turn back on the Keystone. You're going to turn back on the drill, baby, drill line and the
It's drill, baby,
in your
drill.
acceptance speech at the convention.
Sure. It says it all. You know, I'd like to use another line, but there's no line that's better. And we're going to drill, baby, drill. But the fact that they turned it off and then the energy, if you look back at the very initial period of their administration, the numbers started going through the roof, the energy numbers. Inflation was good. And then they went back to Trump where they're trying to equal it. And it kept it bad as opposed to horrific. And it's been really bad. And the energy has been very expensive, but nothing like it could have been. So they went back to Trump type things. But we would have been now 3 to 4 times more. We would have been dominating the entire world on energy. We have more than anybody else, as you've heard me say, but as you also know.
Right.
We have, I call it liquid gold. We have more liquid gold under our feet than anybody else. Actually, by far, we would have dominated. We would have been taking care of Europe. We would have been taking care of Asia. We would have been taking care, Anwar in Alaska is the biggest find anywhere in the world. It could be as big as Saudi Arabia. And I got it. Ronald Reagan couldn't get it. Nobody could get it. I got it. It was done, ready to start. And when these people came in, they turned it off. They terminated it. Nobody could believe it.
I don't know if people realize that 10 to 15% of the entire economy is energy,
Right.
and it weaves its tentacles through everything else. So $5 gas affects the bread truck who's delivering the bread, and that affects the cost of the bread then. And so getting that plentiful changes everything.
So I have a little thing that I've been saying lately because I think it's easily achievable. We pay very high energy costs, and especially now, but we're paying very, very high. I believe I'll be able to get energy down to 50%, 50% of what it is right now within a period of less than a year.
Wow.
That's pretty good. It's going to happen fast.
That sounds like a pretty bold statement. Coming from a different form of engineering, usually for things, as you optimize them, they get harder to improve. A 50% drop in the cost seems nearly unthinkable, purely from advancements in technology or something like that. Potentially he's referencing maybe some subsidizing of energy here, but it seems quite unlikely that we would just unveil new technology or some new process that would cut energy costs in half within a 1-year span. That seems quite optimistic to me, just considering how unlikely that is in many other fields. Usually once you're already at pretty advanced setup, 1 or 2% improvement is usually quite a hard thing to achieve. Can sometimes take months to get even just a percent or 2 improvement. And so to say that you're going to get to 50% in under a year seems quite audacious.
Fast, okay? It's going to happen fast.
Well, what are you going to do to do that? What causes that?
They're going to drill. They're going to frack. They're going to do things that they have tremendous additional.
So taking the regs off. taking the regulation gloves
Yeah.
off.
We have to. They put them back on. They put regulations back on. That areas that have no environmental real meaning, they don't let them drill. They're taking leases away, government leases that you're hearing about. I think we can get energy costs down to half of what they. If we do that,
That's pretty dramatic.
everything, all of those inflated prices are going to come down with it.
I think the other piece of that, and I know he was part of your administration, and you and I were talking before we turned the cameras
Right.
on, that we have a mutual friend in Art Laffer.
Well, he's
and I know
great.
he helped a little.
So before they continue there, basically, he was saying that if you can get the costs lower, the prices will go down. And again, that is presuming a number of things happening. Again, the employer could just take, or the business could just take the higher margin, even if they were able to reduce costs. So, like, let's say, I think in Dave's example of like reducing gas prices, and then it would be cheaper to transport goods from one location to another, they could just absorb that margin themselves to increase profitability. Or they could even leverage this to do other things like invest in their business, hire more employees, assuming that they're going to necessarily take any extra benefit that they have towards their business and immediately kind of pass that on to the consumer. Seems pretty unlikely. That's usually not a business's first goal. Usually there would have to be some type of competition here. And again, that's where effectively we've seen this in a number of areas post-COVID, where with inflation kind of increasing, so many businesses just kind of left prices raised because people had become used to the new prices. And so even as shortages were resolved, they just pocketed the extra money. And so that is likely what a standard business is going to do, to assume that basically most businesses across the board, once they get any advantage in their supply chain or in their delivery mechanisms or their pricing for development of their goods and passing on to the consumer, seems quite unlikely as especially their very first option.
Bit with the tax code in the
did.
last administration. And I personally have experienced the Laffer curve, that lower taxes
Right.
causes increased revenues to the federal government because it heats up the economy. And I'm a small business guy. When you lower my taxes, it doesn't mean I put it in my pocket. It means I hire people.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so talk about lowering taxes in the first year of your administration.
Yeah, you probably saw my plan, and I think we have something really good. I was yesterday in North Carolina, which is great. That was the furniture capital of the world. And China then went in and did a number and took so much of that business, most of that business. The talent, I used to go there to buy furniture
Yeah,
for
we did too.
hotels and things.
Hickory, North Carolina.
Yep, in Hickory. I was in Hickory yesterday and made a speech, and we're going to bring it all back. What we're doing is there's sort of a two-phase. Number one, I took taxes from 39% to 21%. You know that better than anyone. It's the largest tax cuts in the history of our country. And that was great. That's why we became so successful.
You think,
it's funny.
You think we can do that again?
Yeah, I think we can go lower. And I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm bringing it from 21 to 50.
Trump is about to share what he thinks he can do for the tax rates, but clearly Dave is laser focused on lowering tax rates, improving bottom line for the everyday individual. And so definitely a hard stance. Again, I think I've mentioned this in a previous video, but tax rates at the current time are actually at a pretty historic low. Certainly in a number of decades, it's quite low overall. So having another tax cut would be quite an interesting shift to kind of even offset that more. I think Dave had mentioned this a little bit. While they're lowering your tax rate doesn't necessarily directly tie to less taxes overall, because again, there's a variety of ways that we get taxes. I think one, it can incentivize business, as he mentioned. Also, certain companies already avoid taxes in general. So those things aren't completely tied directly, but I'm sure that they are correlated in so much as if you lower tax rate, you're almost certainly going to have lower taxes per person. And so I think the hope here would be, at least from how Dave described it, is that you lower taxes enough that basically money starts to flow through the economy and then starts promoting more growth, and then more folks are doing more business, and then therefore, while they have a lower tax rate, they are potentially having a larger gross revenue, and so therefore they kind of balance each other out. I'm not sure if I've ever seen data that backs that up, but I'm sure that in certain small scenarios that is possible.
15, but you have to manufacture your product here, and then you pay 15%. And then I'm going to put tariffs on countries so they can't come in and steal our business, so that our businesses now can be competitive. Not that, I mean, China came in and just stole all our furniture and many other industries, by the way, including steel. And I saved steel by putting 50% and 100% tariffs on all of the steel that they were dumping. But we're going to do, so in other words, this is a dream for you then. We're bringing the tax rate from 21. Remember, it was 39, and it was really 50 if you add state and local and all of the other things. So we're going to bring it down from 21 to 15. I got it down to 21, which everyone said was impossible, and got it approved.
21 to 15 is definitely a noticeable reduction. He must either be referencing kind of that median tax bracket, because I think current tax brackets go from about like 10 to 12, and then I think around 21. And then again, they escalate to like beyond into the 30s. So he might be referencing kind of the average tax bracket, or might even be referencing kind of that median tax bracket where most folks are going to be impacted. So that'd definitely be an interesting change overall. So interested to see if he describes how he'll offset that price for like government funds or the deficit and other aspects that would be impacted by a change like that.
By Congress. So it's there. And we're going to bring that down to 15, but you have to make your product in the United States.
Yeah. And we do see federal revenues go up when the taxes go down because the economy goes.
You saw it with me.
We saw it with Reagan, too.
You saw it with Reagan. So at 39%, and then down to 21%, you would think we'd do half, or you'd do much less. In the first full year, we did much more revenue in the United States than we did at 39. In other words, we took in much more money.
Which is how you solve the deficit. I mean, Bill Clinton almost balanced the budget with the exact same principle.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. He did. And cost cutting.
Yeah.
We have plenty of cost cutting to do, too, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's
In fact, I'm going to ask Elon, who's a great guy, but he's a pretty good cost cutter.
That was a great interview.
Yeah, that was a great interview.
Yeah, it was.
That was some interview. We did pretty big numbers. I hear we did like 900 million people or something. That was a pretty good, but he's a great guy, and he gave me a full endorsement and all of that. But he's got a good sense on that. There's tremendous cost cutting that we can do.
Seems as though he's stating cost cutting as his method for offsetting potentially other aspects that would be impacted by these tax cuts. And so again, this seems to be somewhat conflicting to what he said of he's expecting higher tax in general, in aggregate from those changes, but is also highlighting tax cutting here. Sorry, not tax cutting and cost cutting. And so curious why he has that stance of doing both at the same time. Potentially he's just referencing some inefficiency he believes exists, but it seems as though that's kind of a argument to offset concerns for a reduced tax rate to begin with. They both have kind of highlighted this data that they haven't gotten specifics into of tax amounts or aggregate tax being increased after tax rate cuts. I would have loved to see data on that, but probably unlikely at this point since they've referenced it a few times without it.
And affect nothing. We're not going to affect anybody. We're not going to hurt anybody. We have to save Social Security and keep it good and solid. I don't want to be raising ages or anything. I don't want to do. They're putting migrants into Social Security. When they get finished, they are. If she got elected, this country is going bust. If she got elected, we're going back to 1929 depression. It would be a disaster for Medicare, Social Security. They're allowing millions and millions of people to come in. You can't use these schools anymore. The quality of life in this country has gone so bad because of what they've done.
One of the things that
definitely disagree with that point. I just wanted to make sure that was called out. I definitely generally not a fan of Trump's views on immigrants in general. Being a child of two immigrants myself, I certainly see the benefit that that has brought for my family and how them and myself I generally consider constructive members of society. And I think it is unfortunate how much Trump highlights immigrants, though potentially he often references illegal immigrants, though he didn't technically specify in that segment right there. Um, so that is a disappointing aspect. Figured I would at least call that out to make sure um, my stance was clear that I definitely don't support that message, but trying to generally be as unbiased as possible while reviewing this interview.
Viewers know about us. We work with tens of thousands of small business people. And so coaching them, 54% of the gross domestic product is businesses 500 people or less.
Yeah.
Almost everyone in America, over half, almost 60% of people work for a small business. And I know small businesses are where jobs come from, not from government. So politicians don't create jobs; small businesses do.
The small businesses
kind of
big
pisses
business.
people like me off when when the politicians say they're ones making the jobs. We're the ones making the jobs. But when
that
you
is
guys
right.
when you guys in government can take your hands off of small business and allow us to do our thing, we're able to employ people and change things. So how can you help small businesses?
Well, the best way is just letting them do what they have to do, but we still have to give them a playing field. If we don't give them a level playing field, they will die. And that's what happened before. That's why China came in. That's why they came in, and they came in at a level like nobody's ever seen, and we did nothing about it. So the word tariff to me is a very beautiful word because it can save our country, truly. And yet, I think because of graft, because of a lot of consulting payments and other things that given by other countries, we have so much fighting with politicians on using it. I saved our steel industries by putting tariffs on steel that China came in and dumped. And you know what they do? They dump and dump and dump. Everybody goes out of business. Then they buy those businesses very cheap, and then they raise the prices to higher than they ever were. That's one of the many benefits that they have if they want to do it. But by putting tariffs on, as an example, in the furniture business in North Carolina, it was so vibrant, and they stole our business. And they charge us, if you wanted to build a furniture place, if you want to sell your furniture in China, they won't take it. But if you want to build a plant in China to make furniture in China using their labor, they open it. We're doing the same thing. But a lot of people are, oh, well, we don't want to have tariffs. The country was at the richest point in its history in the 1890s. It was all tariffs. If you looked at William McKinley as an example, he was a big tariff president. They had committees that were put in charge of what to do with the money. We were taking in so much money. And McKinley would say, why should we let other people come in and steal our factories and steal our workers and steal our jobs? And why shouldn't we benefit? And he tariffed the other countries. And we made so much, and then they went to the income tax system later on. But they would actually they had a blue ribbon committee. Our country was so rich, they didn't know what to do with the money. And this blue ribbon committee was set up to determine how can we spend all of this money, and they took it in through tariffs. But we can turn our country around, make it strong, and then guard it with tariffs.
Yeah. Let's change gears.
Yeah, so tariffs are actually an interesting aspect in which you can basically add additional overhead for like imported goods, things like that. And so this is definitely a tool that can be used to basically increase or incentivize folks within your country in order to have easier competition to some extent. So basically, they're effectively a way of sort of putting your thumb on the scale of competition across your country and other countries. And so, for a scenario where, like they mentioned China here, if China is selling some goods and they're just at a drastically lower price than what they are in the US, you can basically add a tariff for this, and then that will increase the price of that good as it's being sold in the US, and then basically the US can get the tariff, that amount back from any sales that happen there. So he is also kind of highlighting the fact that you'd get so much money. So this is something that would potentially take time. But again, the government would mostly be making money if folks were still buying those goods from like China in that case. However, this does potentially incentivize competition again, because like if the price of a good in China is getting imported and it's like 30% cheaper than what it is in the US, if you had a tariff and then that makes it 10 or 20% cheaper, then it becomes much more reasonable for the market to potentially opt in for the US made brand, for folks who are slightly less cost conscious. Um, and so this can actually promote industries within the US, which I think has definitely been a pretty big topic, especially in COVID and post COVID, where there was a number of shortages. I think a number of folks are becoming cognizant. We've even seen this in particular with semiconductors being referenced in one of the previous videos that we had on the channel. And so, in a number of ways, this could definitely benefit US in either actually absorbing that amount from the tariff itself or promoting growth within the US for similar goods.
Just for a second, my wife Sharon and I were in Scotland 2 weeks ago, and we played a bunch of different courses there, including Turnberry.
Good.
Which arguably, according to the golf guys I was playing with, is the nicest course in the UK right now. And certainly the halfway house, the lighthouse out there.
Isn't that good?
Turnberry's amazing.
Yeah.
But what I came away with, not only is the golf course great, just to give you a huge compliment,
Thank you.
you know that, but the staff and the team, the excellence in the hotel, in the restaurants, in the golf shop, everybody we dealt with. Talk about what it's like to work for Donald Trump. How do you hire leaders and put people in place that do that? Because I know you're obviously not there personally managing that, but you put a culture in place in your organization, and that applies to the administration as well, hiring people that are quality leaders.
Well, my son, Eric, is very much involved, and he runs a lot of it. And Don helps out a lot. And Ivanka, to a lesser extent, you know, she's a great mother and everything. She did a fantastic job in the administration. All she wanted to do is get people jobs. And she'd go around and see Exxon and see Walmart. She wanted jobs for people. It's really pretty amazing. She could have had a very glamorous job, and she would have done well. But Eric's done a great job. And I did a similar type of job when I was doing it. Now I'm doing a thing called running for president, so I don't get. But we rebuilt Turnberry. Turnberry was considered one of the greatest courses in the world because the land is so incredible, right, with the ocean, and you know that ninth hole you're hitting over the ocean. How good a golfer are you?
13.
All right, that's
not great. I'm just learning. I've only been playing 5 years. I'm just learning.
Oh really?
Yeah. Enjoyed you and Bryson's 50.
Wasn't that
That was
great?
fun. That was a great video.
That one did well in terms of the ratings.
It did. And he can swing a club, too.
He can swing, and he's a great guy. And he is very long, very straight. And you know what? He's a great putter.
Yeah.
One of the best putters. He's one of the best putters in the world. That was quite an exciting thing. We got it down to 50.
You actually pulled one hole off. I watched it.
Yeah. Well,
all rode on you. You carried.
It's an interesting tangent that they're making here. As I mentioned, I think in the teaser video, they had highlighted that they had an interest in potentially interviewing Kamala Harris as well, and only Trump has at least replied to take on an interview. And my assumption was that there's probably some bias from or favoritism at a minimum for Dave and Trump. And obviously here they're actually just having some banter around Trump himself, and Dave has actually highlighted the fact that he's actually leveraged services or enjoyed the hotel of Donald Trump or this golf course. And so I'm not sure if this is necessarily a question or topic that he would have been covering with Kamala Harris, since I think he originally stated he'd be covering the same topics with both. So this does seem to be somewhat of a tangent that is somewhat benefiting Trump and kind of highlighting Dave's at least inclination towards Trump. So curious if they'll get back into actually some more strict interview topics that I would definitely be interested in hearing more about, and especially some that would be awesome to hear from Kamala if she actually ever agreed to do an interview with Dave, though unclear how likely that would be.
Even more than one hole, if you want to. But we did well. We did well.
You did. It was very fun. So, what leadership qualities, when Eric's hiring, did you teach him to look for?
Well, I like the recommendation business, but what I like best is taking people that are in the company and moving them up. You take a waitress as an example, and she becomes the head of the restaurant. You say, because you know if certain people are good. And when they work for you already, that's better than recommendation. But if you don't do that, or if you can't do that for some reason, you really need strong references, and then they have to enjoy their job. If they don't enjoy their job, they're not going to be very good at it.
So those were actually some pretty good points. I think um, being a manager myself, hiring a number of folks, working through promotions, I do think that was generally solid advice, which is promoting within, I think is a great policy to have. Trump highlighted a number of scenarios where basically your confidence in this individual is pretty high, which is a great point to make. If you're interviewing someone else, you're only getting a snapshot of that person and potentially what their skills could be. However, compared to somebody who you've been working with maybe for months or even years, you're obviously going to have a way more in depth um, perspective of that individual, their capabilities, and their growth trajectory. And those are things that you're not going to have high confidence on from an external candidate, or at least as high of confidence on from an external candidate. And it also promotes a lot of incentive for the folks who are there. It can build a lot of trust with employees. And so I do generally agree with that sentiment. I think it can definitely be a very healthy and beneficial practice to try to promote from within as much as possible, as this again incentivizes growth within the company. It rewards folks for their commitment and for their contributions, and so totally agreed there on that front.
I ended up at a table, Ronnie Barrett,
Yeah.
Barrett,
Right.
Barrett 50 Cal, is a friend of ours, and I ended up at a table with him at an NRA convention with Eric and Donald. Got to spend some time with both of them, and you're right, they're impressive. How do you raise great kids? What'd you do?
So
The grandkids are turning out. The granddaughter killed it.
We have. Oh, how good
at the
was
convention.
she? Yeah.
Wow.
She's a great golfer,
Yeah,
by the way.
yeah,
She's
yeah. She's a great speaker too.
she was good. She was a beautiful person in every way. She took over that whole Republican convention. And Kai, our beautiful Kai. So
What's your parenting
the
style?
one thing I always told my kids: no drugs, no alcohol, no cigarettes. Now, in my day, there were no drugs. There was alcohol and cigarettes, and I had a brother that went through a lot with alcohol, and he taught me a lot. He really taught me a lot. And my brother Fred, and he had a problem with alcohol, to put it mildly. And he would always, and he was quite a bit older than me, and he'd been through it. And he would say, "No alcohol. I never want to see you drink." Very strong. And he'd also say no cigarettes, but because, cigarettes are like, you don't need, if you don't smoke, if you don't drink, you have no problem with staying off it. When you do drink it's very hard to stay off it. I mean, I've seen very strong people that cannot get off. But the way you get off is if you never start. If you never start, I never had a glass of alcohol in my life. I've never had a glass of alcohol, if you can believe it. I think largely because of my brother. I think if I did, I probably would have a problem, personality type, right? But I never had a glass. I have no longing for it. I have friends that are in the wagon, as they say, and I watch them watching trays go by. The tray is going by. Oh, it's like they have, it's a thing that they can't get over with. Same with smoking. It's tough. I've seen guys just grab somebody's cigarette. They haven't had one in a long time. And to them, it's like the greatest sensation. If you've never smoked, you just don't have that problem. So I tell people for their children, no drugs, no alcohol, and no cigarettes.
I'm not really sure if that's a parenting philosophy in general. And also definitely, I think makes reasonable points there. Definitely for any viewers, I would definitely try to discourage drug or alcohol or cigarette usage. And if you use any substance, to use it within moderation. But generally, it's basically all of those things are not healthy for you in the long term, or even probably the short term, whether we realize it or not. And so I do generally agree with that principle. Generally, folks should try to avoid those things, but not sure how exactly that ties back to his parenting philosophy and how he presumably got good kids, quote unquote, from Dave perspective and his question there. And so still didn't quite answer that for me, but I think reasonable point to generally discourage that. I generally agree with that sentiment, but don't really feel like that quite answered the question.
At
Usually work
least
really, really hard. How'd you teach
They
them work
do.
ethic?
they have to like
Yeah, seems like Dave is kind of pointing him towards that aspect, especially because I think Trump had just highlighted his kids in the successful management of his business and their leadership. And so that makes sense that Dave was probably looking for how did you kind of grow and mentor and coach his children into being the successes that he is highlighting previously. And so he seemed to have kind of gotten off point, but maybe we'll hear something new from this question.
what they do. If they don't like what they do, they do. My kids like what they do. And I would say genetically, I'm a believer in genetics. I like it. I'm good at doing certain things. And, racehorses, like two slow racehorses don't produce a Kentucky Derby winner, right? That's not the way it is. But you have to have an ability at something. And if you don't have the ability, don't do it. But most importantly, do something you like, whether it's your parents or not. Your parents want you to go into a business, or they want you to go into a store with them if they have.
This might be some sense of nature versus nurture, and I guess he's kind of highlighting he believes it's much more nature than anything else, which is an interesting stance. And so curious to see where he takes it from there.
A store. I would say that you have to love what you do. If you don't love what you do, it's not going to work. I've never seen it. If you don't want to get up in the morning and go to work. Now, a lot of people say, with all the people that come after you, do you really love getting up in the morning? You understand that, right? I'm attacked at left and right. But I do, because we make so much progress. We're doing great on the campaign, as you probably see. We're leading in the campaign now and doing well. We beat Biden, and we were up so far on him, and then they said, that's like a fight. You're in a fight, and they changed the fighter in the middle of the, right? In the middle of the fight, they changed the fighter. And now we're beating her very badly. I'd be.
He sort of switched topics here, but he was somewhat touching on this point, which is I do also think has generally that I find to be true, and I think has been seen to be true in the past, which is generally you should hopefully like what you do, but also folks tend to like things that they are good at. And so that can be a positive feedback cycle where if you're interested in something and then you work at it and then you improve at it and you see your progress and then you'll like it even more. And so while I agree with the sentiment, you should try to do things that you enjoy. I think probably one caveat I would make onto that point is also try to do things that you can see yourself improving at and that you can see the progress in, because that's also going to help motivate you in order to stick with it long enough such that you can see a positive outcome, and then that can energize you and that can continue to positively shape your perception of that work. But do hope most folks do enjoy what they do, though I doubt that's going to be the case for everybody. And so my follow-up recommendation would be at least try to do things that you're at least somewhat interested in, and also things that you think you can see progress in and that you can see yourself progressing.
So interesting to see her in your show, because I don't believe that she would be able to answer any questions on what you discuss better than anybody else.
Well, I'm happy to have her if she'd come.
I'm sure she would be. I'm sure she'd love to come. She wouldn't come.
So I hear you're going back to Butler and finish the speech.
I am. I'm going to say, as I was saying.
Yeah.
Right?
So when that happened and you get in the car, I know I saw a clip the other day that Melania was watching on television.
Yeah.
So she saw the shot, saw you dodge, saw you go down, saw you get up.
Yeah.
And how fast were you able to get on the phone and talk to her?
Well, I know she was calling, and I was a little tough to take a phone call with blood pouring down your ear.
Yeah.
People don't know the ear is the bloodiest part. If you get hit in the ear, it bleeds because there was a lot of blood. But no, I spoke to her by the time I got to the hospital. I spoken to her, and she was sort of watching it. She had it held off for a couple of minutes, and then somebody called her and said, "He's okay. He's okay." She said, "What do you mean he's okay? What does that mean?" She had no idea, and then she went back and pressed it and caught up. No, it was tough for her, tough for my son too. He came out. Somebody had said, "Your father just got hit." And he came in and he was very, very riled up.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing. That was a tough day, and I don't recommend it for anybody. I got very lucky, or maybe more than luck.
Yeah, if you don't turn your head and start talking about the immigration chart at the precise moment, it's a problem.
If I don't turn my head at the exact 90-degree angle, if I was a little off, one way or the other, it's I'm not doing this very nice interview with you. I wouldn't be around to do this interview.
Yeah. So, again, I'm not sure how he would ask these similar questions to Kamala Harris if she were to accept an interview, since there are a few questions that are very specific to Trump. So it's unclear how they would have kind of a somewhat fair or equivalent interview process with the two candidates. But did want to highlight, I do think folks generally should avoid violence, and certainly think that folks should generally try to stay tolerant of others, even if you disagree with their point of view or maybe some of the things that they say or do. I think tolerance is definitely a virtue for sure, and being able to empathize with those folks that you disagree with, I think, is certainly challenging, but I think it can lead to much better outcomes than resorting to violence or succumbing to hatred or anger or any of these other things. And so while I'm sure I do get angry myself and dislike others based off of the things they say or do, I do think it is up to each of us to try to be as tolerant as we can be. And so I definitely wanted to take a note, since they're referencing the assassination attempt, that hopefully anybody who disagrees with anyone's points can take a moment to think about the other individual as another human being going through the same things that you're probably going through at some point in your life. And that I'm sure if you just took a moment to sit with one of these other individuals and take a moment to recognize them as a human being as well, in similar scenarios to you, they have a family, they have a job, that'll help you hopefully maintain perspective and allow you to kind of see them beyond just the things you disagree with them about.
So when you were in the White House for 4 years, you were talking about loving your work earlier. I have the privilege of loving my work. That's why I still work.
You do?
That's why I still do it. I don't need to, obviously, anymore, just like you don't need to. What was the most rewarding thing in the 4 years that you were there for you?
So my whole thing is make America great again. All right. That's why I do it. And we did it. Then COVID came. We did a really good job on that. So it was always about making it great again. I had the country going just prior to COVID coming in at a level that nobody had ever seen. And even if you go all 4 years, it was so good that even with that terrible interruption that just destroyed the world, we had the greatest 4 years. The economy was so great. The job numbers were the best ever, et cetera. And I think just that concept of what I had done.
Just the performance.
Yeah. But individual things, getting the tax cuts approved, biggest tax cuts in history, biggest regulation cuts in the history of our country, rebuilding the military. We did a job in the military. I rebuilt the whole military. And then you see a lot of that military being given to Afghanistan stupidly because they left the country. I mean, and now you see them parading it back and forth. That was, I think, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, what they did. but there were a lot of individual achievements that we had. The creation of Space Force. Space Force is now dominating space. And when I came, there was no Space Force. The first time since Air Force, 78 years, maybe 80 years by now. And we are dominating space now. And we wouldn't be. We were in third place by far, and now we're way in first place. And it's very important. Militarily, it's very important.
President Trump, thanks for taking time.
Thank you very
much.
much.
Your team told us you got a speech here in a few minutes.
I do.
We were still able to squeeze this in, and I appreciate your time. Appreciate you hanging out with us a little bit.
It's a great honor. I've watched you for many years. I shouldn't say that, but I can say it from both of us. I watched you for many years, and a real pro. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. Good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that felt more of like a softball interview. They only really had a couple of questions. Really, it was just inflation, tax rates, and then mostly interpersonal stuff, I would describe, for that interview. So a little disappointed that they didn't ask harder hitting questions, or have more discussion there. And interested to see if Kamala ever does reply for a potential interview with Dave. If she does, I'll cover that here as well. But thank you for watching. And if you liked what you saw, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.